Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Vishal Dahiya, and this week we will talk about military satellites. Indian Space Research Organization, that is ISRO, this week launched a dedicated communication satellite for defense purposes. GSAT-7A, which took off from the launch pad of Sriharikota in Andhra Pradesh, can be used by Indian Air Force and Indian Army. This satellite will connect all assets of Indian Air Force, such as fighter planes, airborne early warning control platforms, and drones with each other and ground stations. This, in turn, will give the Indian Air Force network-centric warfare capability. The Indian Navy already has a satellite dedicated for its own use, the GSAT-7, also called as Rukmini, which was launched in 2013. The GSAT-7 provides Indian Navy the real-time secure communications capability over the Indian Ocean region. GSAT-7A, along with GSAT-7 and GSAT-6, will form the band of communication satellite for use of security forces, along with the battery of Earth imaging Cartosat series of satellites. So how does these satellites help our defense forces, and what are their unique characteristics? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests today. Let me start by introducing them to you, beginning with Mr. Pallava Bagla, the science editor of NDTV. We also have with us Mr. Alok Bansal, Director, India Foundation, and we have with us Group Captain Ajey Lele, the Senior Fellow of IDSA. Let me begin with you, Pallava, to try and explain to our viewers as to what exactly are we talking about when we say the military satellites, the term itself, and the recent launch, that is GSAT-7A. How does it fall in that category?
Well, the categorization is not very clear. It's a communication satellite. Now, if it is used by a specific agency, then you can categorize it as a military asset. In this case, the GSAT-7A is a satellite dedicated for use by the Indian Air Force. The Indian Air Force has paid for this satellite. It is made to their specifications, and they would be the dedicated users. It's like a camera. You can use a camera to take pictures. You can take a camera to go and snoop across the border. You can take a picture of your girlfriend also. So it's a communication satellite. You can use it for all kinds of communication. But it is far more ruggedized to give foolproof, fail-proof communication for the Indian Air Force 24/7, 365 days a year, even within KU band. That is the beauty of this satellite, and that it should be able to give you a signal which can be received on a handheld device. Okay. That is what makes this satellite very sophisticated and very unique. And the Indian Air Force has been waiting for this for a very long time. Finally, they have the bird in the sky, and ultimately they would be the beneficiaries of it, and you and I would be immensely protected thanks to this force multiplier.
Okay, let's bring in Group Captain Ajey Lele here. In terms of its usage for the Indian Air Force and other purposes, as well as Pallava was pointing out, that this has been made as per the specifications desired by the Indian Air Force, more ruggedized version of the usual communication satellites are. So in what terms, going beyond what Pallava has said, this is going to sort of, help the Indian Air Force in the ways it communicates as of now?
As far as this satellite is concerned, it has got a swath, one can say, across the entire country. Now, one must understand that Indian Air Force has got bases which are spread across the country. You need to have a certain amount of connectivity with all these bases. Now, these bases should have connectivity with whom? They should have connectivity with various other assets which are required for day-to-day operations, or even during operations during wartime. Now, these assets could be in form of your own aircrafts. These assets could be in form of your UAVs. These assets could be in form of your radars. It could be in form of your what we call AWACS. So all these assets have to be combined together. What used to happen is that till date you used to have a ground infrastructure where all these signals, say from UAV or even management of a UAV, flying activities of a UAV, were controlled by a ground station. So there are various ground stations which was giving all those indications, all those signals to the main port, I can say. So all these signals now will be picked up by a satellite, and almost in a real time this information will be available with the people of the Air Force who are in need of it. Now, what sort of information this would be? This would be information essentially on your communication networks. it will be a information which is a recurrency information. So you will be knowing various aspects as far as launching of the missions are concerned. So all that sort of information which is normally required in almost in real time and uninterrupted 24/7 in all weather and terrain conditions needs to be made available. So this information will be made available by this satellite. So in short, I will say that this satellite is just a carrier. It is picking up information from various sources.
Okay, so that explains more or less what GSAT-7A is and what it is going to do. Let's bring in Mr. Alok Bansal here. Mr. Bansal, from your perspective, for our viewers to understand again, the entire concept of having a military satellite or having a satellite which helps the defense forces.
See, satellite has multiple uses, as Mr. Bagla said, that you could use it for different purposes. But these are primarily communication satellites. They provide secure communication to a particular user. Just to give you an example, the first dedicated military satellite was Rukmini. Now, Navy had a very specific requirement, because when the ships are at sea, they cannot transmit, because if they transmit on high frequency, their position is compromised. And the entire naval battle is premised on this fact that in this vast expanse of ocean, you can't find a particular ship or a vessel. Now, so ships would remain incommunicado. So that restricted their ability. If they had to pass any important communications, they had to always compare the risk that was there as far as the compromising. But now what has happened, because of Rukmini, they are able to communicate under a secure environment. Now, what would happen in the case of Air Force? Generally, the aircraft used to remain airborne for a very limited period, so it was felt that probably the ground communication would suffice. But what's happening now with Predators and other high endurance drones coming into play, and those drones which are going to be armed in future, you would need communication, and at long distances and for a long duration of time. And I think to that extent, I think the need for this sort of a dedicated satellite was there. And I think this sort of a satellite will help Indian Air Force, and to that extent Indian Army also, to some extent, as it also has its own assets which would probably require this sort of a communication facility to be able to maintain and control these drones and other various air assets and communicate with them simultaneously. And this would probably facilitate communicating with large number of platforms simultaneously and in real time. And especially when you are going to have armed platforms which need to act based on your inputs, I think this is going to be very, very vital.
Okay. Pallav, Mr. Bansal spoke about GSAT-7, and there was something, the next point which I would have come to you automatically, that's Rukmini, which is known as specifically for Indian Navy. So, if you could tell us, more about GSAT-7, its characteristics, because that was way back in 2013 that this was done.
It's still functional. The Indian Navy on record told me that Rukmini or GSAT-7, which is a predecessor of GSAT-7A, has functioned very well. And as Mr. Bansal said, it has provided secure communication for our Indian ships in the vast Indian Ocean region. That is where. And that particular satellite had a special communication band, UHF, which is not there in 7A, because that was specifically asked for the Navy, by the Navy. And that particular satellite has helped the Indian Navy use its own satellites and secure communication across the Indian Ocean. And the Indian Navy operates over a very large area. I must also add to what Ajey had said. I was told repeatedly by the Indian Air Force that the satellite communication will only be another redundant layer. The operational activity would still be done with the terrestrial networks, and the satellite layer of communication would be a redundant in case the terrestrial networks fail. So it's in times of need, or like Mr. Bansal said, when you have drones which are operating at far distances, remote areas where they need to connect back to the hub, and there you need satellite connectivity, that is where it would play a very significant role. So together, GSAT-7, which gives Indian Navy an edge, GSAT-7A, when it's fully functional, would give the Indian Air Force an edge, and GSAT-6, which is another high-powered, very sophisticated communication satellite, which gives an edge to our central forces, largely giving handheld communication ability for CRPF and other agencies when they are operating in the Naxal prone areas, because it has a very special antenna, 6-meter diameter antenna, through which you can get a communication to a handheld device. So all these three assets, they are communication satellites. In addition, we also have in India satellites which can do earth imaging, which can again, the Cartosat series, even the most recent one has has a special camera which can constantly view over India, the Indian Ocean region, looking for intrusions of ships which come into our area. So all these assets combined would help giving India an edge in warfare.
Ajey, from that perspective only, specifically when we talk about, defense forces getting an edge from these satellite networks, rather boosting the communication channels which we have. When we look at our neighborhood specifically, what we are trying to go ahead and protect our borders from, or specifically when we talk about Navy, the Indian Ocean region, how do you do in terms of comparative analysis, where do we stand in as far as vis-a-vis our neighbors, specifically the two, the most talked about, China and Pakistan?
You see, as far as satellites from a military usage are required, they are basically required for 3 to 4 purposes. Most important purpose is of a what we call reconnaissance or earth image observation. The second purpose is for navigation and for communication requirements. So when one is talking of usage of a satellite for armed forces, basically these are the 3 domains where you require expertise. Other than that, you require weather satellites, you require satellites for electronic intelligence, you require satellites for signal intelligence, you require satellites for communication intelligence, and there are a few other satellites also like radar intelligence and other purposes. So you need to have a mix of all these satellites. As far as our adversaries are concerned, China has got a great investment into the space domain, and they have almost all satellites in all these various capacities. As far as Pakistan is concerned, they may be a good force from a nuclear perspective and from a missile perspective, but as far as Pakistan's investments into space domain is concerned, it's extremely limited. But they have got an advantage that China is offering them all the help. Just to give you an example, that the way India has come out with its own navigational system, NAVIC, China has got one of the best navigational systems right now operational in the world called Baidu. This system they have already made operational for entire Asia Pacific region, and the military grade signal of this system for a navigational system is also been made available to Pakistan. So as far as Pakistan's requirements are concerned, China is mostly fulfilling their requirements, and from Chinese point of view, their requirements are fulfilled by their own infrastructure. So China, to my mind, is totally self-sufficient as far as satellite domain is concerned. They got good amount of a series of Earth observation satellites where they are getting good imagery, because one must understand that what China is preparing is essentially not to fight a war against India, but they got larger aims. They are looking at a Taiwan theater more seriously. So as far as China's investments into satellite technology are concerned, they have got certain amount of a biases to compare themselves with the US. Unfortunately, their investments is also coming very healthily available for them in the Indian region too. But at present, I will say that as far as India's requirements are concerned, because one should not unnecessarily get into a comparison mode. As far as Indian Armed Forces requirements are concerned, we have just made a beginning in the satellite domain. We need to more in this.
Okay, Mr. Bansal, just made a beginning, but it is also said that well begun is half done.
See, well begun is half done, and please understand, while military satellites may be a new thing with 2013 onwards, a new phenomena, but even our multi-usage satellites had enormous utility for the military. And I think in the field of remote sensing, I think that we started with, and where we are getting surveillance or pictures or images that we have been getting, I think we have been second to none virtually, actually. And I think we have done fairly good job of that, though it was primarily for civilian usage, but those pictures could also be used for military usage. And to the best of my knowledge, Pakistan does not have any such facility. Even Chinese remote sensing capabilities were suspect at one stage, though of course I think over the years they would be in a better position to say China has taken giant strides. It's the third country to send a manned mission to space and all those things. So it has really taken quantum leaps in recent times, but we also have done phenomenally well in this particular field, and I think ISRO is recognized as an entity which has scaled new heights and has broken new barriers actually. So to that extent we have done, and I think we'll keep moving forward and forward, and I think well begun, as you said, is half done, and I think Air Force has now started doing. There is no doubt that of the three services, Navy is the one which actually requires the satellite the most, and that's why I think they came up with the first requirement for 2013. They actually came up with a dedicated funding for a satellite, because their requirement is most, because their arena of operations is far wider than the other two services, and I think it would require more satellites in times to come.
Okay.
And I think that is where I think we'll have to incorporate more satellites, and I think newer capabilities. Navigation, we are already working on it. I think the ISRO is already working on the navigation fields. The ultimate would be when we could have a global constellation of navigational satellites, when we could probably rival GPS or Baidu. Baidu is not a global chain. So I think that would be the ultimate, but as of now what we have is, I think, more than adequate for our requirements at this point of time.
Okay, it's more than adequate. That's what Pallava, as Bansal is, Mr. Bansal is pointing out, that as far as ISRO is concerned, it scale new heights. From your perspective, ISRO obviously has carved out a niche for itself, and it is known for, India is now known for its space technology and its prowess there. But its military use, from that perspective, as Mr. Ajey was pointing out, that we have made, taken first few important steps. How far do you believe we should be moving ahead? At what speed should we be achieving our targets from here onwards, where it is, the requirement, the military requirement of uses of satellites is concerned?
Well, sky is the limit. If the Indian Air Force wants 10 more satellites, ISRO would be in a position to give 10 more satellites. Navy wants 5 more satellites, ISRO would be in a position to give 5 more satellites. Obviously, these are user funded, the users will have to fund them. To say that we started doing in 2013, I think would be wrong. In 2013, we designated a particular satellite as a satellite for the Navy. Before that also, transponders on our INSATs were being hired by the services and being used. Whether it was ever in the public domain and whether they were designated.
So exactly, it has been a long journey.
It has been a long journey. Satellite images have been available to Indian armed forces for a very long time. All of us know during the surgical strikes, images from Cartosat 2 series, which is less than a meter resolution from that height, were definitely used for the operations. The radar sat imaging capabilities India has had for quite some time with both RadarSat 1 and RadarSat 2. Those images were available. And let me also add a point to what Ajey said. Recently, Pakistan launched 2 satellites with China's help, which he pointed out. One a communication satellite and one Earth imaging satellite, which most people say is an X-band RadarSat, which is a very sophisticated Earth imaging satellite capability which made through Chinese help, and a capability which India also does not have. So they are also looking over our shoulders with great detail. So this is a game which goes on the eastern border, the western border. This will go on, and the NAVIC series, which Mr. Bansal mentioned, the NAVIC series, which is the Indian Regional Navigation System, is up and operational. 1,500 kilometers along the Indian border. The signal is available in both for the civilian use and for military use. And at times when you would need for targeting your missiles, that signal is available for Indian armed forces.
Okay, so there can be dual uses as well, and as Pallava is pointing out that this game will continue. This competition between different countries, be it in our neighborhood as well. But Ajey, from the end user's perspective, what is it that the forces would now be looking forward to in terms of what they would or they might require the services of various satellites in terms of achieving their military objectives? Or ensuring that they keep that sharp eye over the borders or completing other tasks?
You see, as far as we are concerned, one must accept the fact that now we are operating in a 21st century atmosphere. In a 21st century atmosphere, you are talking of a 4th generation aircraft, you are talking of a 5th generation aircraft. you're talking of all the platforms, whether they have been used by Army, Navy or Air Force, which are modern platforms, which are state-of-art platforms. So all these platforms require tremendous amount of help from a satellite. Let's slightly go back and look at 1991 Gulf War. 1991 Gulf War taught rest of the world that yes, you can use satellite for multiple purposes and it will give you very good results. So right from targeting to communication to various other activities which are essentially remote sensing related activities which will give you a lot of intelligence input, you require satellites. So all the three services will have their own specific requirements from an intelligence gathering point of view also. They will have certain requirements which are real time, they will have certain requirements which are slightly over a longer period of time. So every service specific satellites would be required in years to come, because every service is upgrading its entire inventory of arms and ammunition. So this entire inventory of arms and ammunition, because today when you are talking of various missiles also, today when you are talking of various aircrafts which are basically firing missiles, say something like what we call as a JDAMs, that is Joint Direct Attack Munitions. These are all GPS guided bombs. So for all these activities, you are going to depend on satellites in years to come. So from every service point of view, you will have certain common requirements and certain specific requirements. Particularly the requirements will come into the arena of remote sensing, because you are very keen, particularly since India is a country which has got problems on both the borders, and both the borders are not simple borders from a terrain and a topography and a weather point of view. So you require a lot amount of inputs. So present day satellites, are they fulfilling those inputs? To a certain extent, yes, but we are investing into modern technologies. We are investing into technologies like synthetic aperture radar. Now we are even planning a satellite which will be a satellite jointly done by NASA and ISRO also on a synthetic aperture radar, because you require these technologies to have 24/7 and all weather and all terrain availability of a data inputs. So these are the places where people are going to work in days to come. And as far as ISRO is concerned, they have got their main focus which is concentrated towards civilian requirements. So we need to do slightly more into a military domain, and I think a first step has been taken from that point of view, where government has announced to formulation of a defense space agency.
Defense space agency.
We have a small space cell into the integrated headquarters, but now that has been converted into a defense space agency. It is short of, say, space command, but I think that's a good beginning, where now they will understand and try to actually put on papers that what are the specific requirements of every service. Okay. And subsequently we can take the measures.
Okay, Mr. Bansal, concluding comments from you that the future seems to be very interesting as far as this sector is concerned.
Undoubtedly, I think as Ajay said, after 91, I think the world has stood up and taken notice of the capabilities of the satellites, and I think we have been, I wouldn't say very quick, but we have been fairly quick to understand, especially different services. I think, as I said, Navy was first of the block, but the other services are also coming, and I think now this defense space agency which has been established, I think it needs to be expanded in due course to create a space command, because eventually now the defense services would need space, because space would need to be harnessed to essentially help them to augment their fighting capabilities. And I think in all three fields, that is remote sensing, communication and navigation, I think we need to move forward. We have made a very good beginning, a robust beginning, and now we have to take it forward from here.
Okay, so as our panelists have pointed out that we have made a robust and a good beginning, and as all of us are aware, ISRO has carved out a niche for itself, and there have been several developments as far as fulfilling the needs of Indian Defence Forces are concerned. But you should watch out for this space, because there seems to be a lot of more interesting activities happening as far as this particular sector is concerned, that is the scope of military satellites. We'll come back again next week with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.